Mom Who Knows Nada. My name is Brianna. This is the Mom Who Knows Nada podcast. We met our guest, Analiza Wolf, when I was doing the Roar Indie Author interview series. So obviously she is a writer, an indie author, focused on books for children, but she also has a past life as a CEO, and as an Asian American woman. We decided to be a really good thing to talk about what it's like in the C-suite as the woman of color. So Analiza, I'm so stoked to have this conversation. I can't wait to get into it with you. Thank you for coming back and being part of my parenting podcast. So let's get right into it. You asked me this question before we logged on, and I thought it was really poignant to start with this because I feel like other women probably struggle with this. You said, how do I introduce myself? And my answer was like, depends on the context. Because in so many situations, I am Declan's mom, but I'm equally a writer and a podcaster. So bringing all of that, and it took me 2 minutes to get to that. But as women, we're taught, and these were your words, not mine, so let me give you credit, to be humble and quiet. And so when someone asks me how, just you asking me how I introduce myself, totally my brain exploded. I've never thought about that. Anyway, welcome.
Thanks, Brianna. No, it's a great response because it just shows how much you want to make sure that people you're with feel comfortable. I know that you're a mom, you're a really committed mom. It isn't until a couple of minutes later that you mentioned, I also podcast and I also write. And I said, well, isn't that the thing you want to lead with? And you said, no, well, that feels really hard. And I'd feel I'm so into myself and people wouldn't be interested in that. I said, well, why is it so uncomfortable for us, Brianna? So it was a great answer. And also it was really nice that you got to that insight too.
Yeah, it took me a little while. But why, let's just riff on that for a second. Why do you think as women, we kind of withhold something that really is a huge part of our identity? Not that motherhood isn't a huge part of our identity, but we were something before and we're still not just mothers. So why do you think that's uncomfortable for us?
Brianna, when we define what's a good girl, good girls are sweet, they're kind, they are quiet, they follow directions, they do the right thing because that's what good girls do. They help others, they're not too big, and they're all about the team. And so we grow up wanting to be good, and we get actually lots of accolades for that, right? We get certificates, we get gummy bears, we're told we're a good girl, we continue on. That kind of works at school because maybe become teachers' pets, maybe become, valedictorian, keeps going to college, and all of that works. But when we are out there, and for you and me, it's really important that we start to talk about our work because our work is near and dear to us. But it's also important that we have others hear about us because that's how we get business and we have opportunities. And so when we're out there and we say, I'm Analiza Wolf and I'm an executive coach. I have been CEO, a captain, a writer. Here are all the awards I've gotten. I mean, it just feels uncomfortable. And it feels uncomfortable because that wasn't what I was trained to do. That wasn't what is a good girl. And even, Brianna, I have a holiday card that I send out every year. I'll add you to the list. And
yes.
It's also uncomfortable, even though I talk about here's really fun trips that we've done. Here's accomplishments that were hard for me or scary. And I was able to get it out there. Part of me is really scared when I hit send on that maybe people will think that I'm too much or that I'm trying to brag or that I think I'm better than others. And that would be the worst, right? If people thought that I was too big or I was too boastful because it's so counter to our identities of who we want to be. So I want to name that. And I also want to name that sometimes you do get people who say, you are, I once got someone who replied and said, why are you talking about these things? Who do you think you are? It was such a weird email to get back. Wow. And I realized, I know it was whoa. I mean, I sent this out to a good amount of people. I get that maybe very rarely, maybe once or twice in my life. So it's not like that never happens or it happens often. But when it does, it's true too, right? When people do get, you do get these responses. Not everyone's going to love you. That's the thing too. We want to be liked, right? Well, Brianna, will you like me? Will the people listening to this like me? And the reality is, to be liked is not a race where we're ever going to win. Like, that is never going to win. Like, it's by definition, not everyone's going to like you unless you're never out there, unless you never say anything. And then if you're not saying anything or never out there, then are you really making a difference in the world? So, okay, I don't want to make a difference. I don't want to say anything. Then people will like me, but they won't even know me. Okay, well, then I guess I won. But then what kind of life is that to lead? Who are you modeling for your parents? So anyway, who are you modeling as parents for your kids? So it all makes sense why it feels uncomfortable, and yet it's courage over comfort. What do you choose? You can't have both.
Yeah, courage, that's a really good thing. It's like if you never stand for something, you'll fall for anything, that little colloquialism, and it's super true. Like if you don't have an opinion, you know, you're not going to be everybody's favorite.
Absolutely.
That's okay, right?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, someone told me either, you know, you can be beige or you can have color. Who do you want to be? Like, do you want in the box of crayons? You can't see me, or you can pick up like a color, but not everyone's going to love the color.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I love that. So before we get into your professional career and what you're doing now, what did you want to be when you were a little girl?
Honestly, Brianna, I was a good Asian girl. So as a good Asian girl, I wanted to be a doctor.
Oh,
I know. Well, my mom was a nurse, and I was at a Filipino party, and I had like a plate full of Filipino food, which is all basically pork and awesome like meats and stuff, before I turned vegetarian. And I had a bunch of Filipino aunties who were like, what do you want to be? I mean, I think it was the second question after, you know, do you have enough food? Are you hungry? I'm like, wow, huge plate of food. And then it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, nurse. And they're like, maybe doctor. And I was like, doctor? They're like, yes, doctor. And I was like, oh, that's a good response. I want to be a doctor, because then the Filipino aunties will like me. So, yeah, I'm obviously not a doctor, but for a long, long time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor.
And then what did you end up being? What did you grow into?
So, you know, I'm, as you know, working on a book of myths, and we think that there's like a path, right? The chosen path. If you do this path, you'll be successful. Like, we'll be golden. You know, you're arrived at the yellow brick roads, wherever that is. And I thought that I would be a doctor, went to Stanford, realized that I did not want to follow this like really long path of medicine. I didn't really like biology or chemistry or any of those classes.
Red flag.
And I discovered a thing called industrial engineering, which sounds, they call it imaginary engineering at Stanford. It's the least technical of the engineerings, although it's still engineering. So that's why it's imaginary engineering. But it's basically about how do you put together a business, an organization, so it runs as well as can be, and you can build something that matters in the world and lead people. And I was like, oh my gosh, you can major in this. It sounds so wonderful. So I had no idea what I was going to do with that. I ended up joining the Air Force. So I followed my dad's footsteps, and then went to business school, did a few years in marketing at Colgate-Palmolive, selling toothpaste, which is apparently like, it's like a very hard job to get. So I'm always like, wow, you know, anyway, selling toothpaste. And then I was in education for 15 years, leading schools. Now I'm an executive coach and I facilitate leadership groups. That it's such a different path than the one-track doctor. And now I have so many different experiences, which I wouldn't like trade any of them for the world. So I'm so grateful for this meandering path.
So tell us a little bit your role, because you were an executive in the C-suite. Tell us about that trajectory and how you got there, and what was it like to be a Filipino American in that role?
So I didn't set out to be a CEO, and most of the women that I talk with on my podcast never did either. It's not like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're like, I want to dominate the world and be a CEO. Like, none of us really said that. So when I decided to be CEO, it wasn't even until a mentor said to me, why are you looking at COO roles? Shouldn't you just be CEO? And I was like, really? And it made sense, but I had just never thought about it. And it wasn't really the type of leader that I wanted to be, one that was out there, really on stage. But what I realized is that I had not that many people of color, women of color especially, who I could look up to as CEOs. And I really believe in social justice. And if I believe in social justice and that everyone could be a leader, and there weren't that many leaders of color, women leaders especially, then part of the movement was that I would step into that role. Even though that didn't feel particularly comfortable or really what I wanted, I knew that I could have impact. And part of it was to be me in that role. So that's why I took the role. What was it like? I mean, it's a little weird when you walk into a building or any place and people turn to you and like, who are they looking at? Why do they want to talk to me? And you're like, right, because I'm the leader of this organization. The buck stops here. I'm comfortable making decisions and all of that. I just wasn't, I didn't really think about being the face of a place, although that is important in the work. So it was a really good experience, and I'm really glad I did it. I'm also glad to be supporting leaders now.
Not all the pressure. I know what I mean?
A lot, especially when you're doing it during the pandemic.
Oh, I can't even imagine. So you mentioned the Air Force. How did that role and being part of like a military organization shape your role as a leader?
I mean, Brianna, you and I are women, and when you look at, especially my face, people were confused. They're like, "What? Why are you wearing that uniform? Are you really part of the Air Force?" I once had someone, I did a lot of international relations, and so I looked like the kids, because I was dealing with senior leaders. I looked like their kid or their girlfriend. Like a lot of them had girlfriends in addition to their wives. Anyway,
fun,
so,
great
thing. But it was interesting because so many of them would look at me and say, "Are you really even American?" Because I'm not typical white, blue-eyed, like Air Force kind of poster boy looking.
Yeah.
So they were confused, and they were confused about why I was the one working with them, because I looked very young. And I was young. And then I once had someone ask me to sing the Air Force song. He's like, well, if you really are, then sing the Air Force song. And I didn't even stop to question that was not okay.
Yeah.
For them to even ask me that. But I was like, okay. And so I did. And he was like, I guess you are. And we went on to do the work. But yeah, it was a really good experience in terms of being able to have a ton of responsibility very early. I learned from incredible leaders who I invited later to my wedding. I talk about Colonel Schiffer. He's the best. Like, I invited him to my wedding, and I've just been so grateful for these leadership models who I continue to model myself after. Best leadership experiences that I've had in my whole career. So that was great. But as a woman of color leading people who were white, mostly white, taller than me, older than me, it was a really challenging leadership experience, but pretty great.
Yeah, I can imagine just in general, like as a woman, well, first of all, I want to go back to that comment, like, are you really Air Force? If so, sing the song. I 100% get, and I don't know how old you were at this time, but I could 100% see like 25-year-old Brie being like compliant in that if that question was asked to me. But like almost 40-year-old Brie would be like, who are you? Like, I don't have to prove myself to you. Like, you think I'm just wearing this to like in this Air Force uniform just because? Like, I think it's a fun thing to do. Like, shut up. Like, go away. So I can't imagine how you felt in that moment, and then reflecting upon that moment, like, but then I guess it's like, those are the moments that when we look back in hindsight, you're like, oh, I'm never going to let that happen again. Like, I'm never going to let somebody belittle me or infringe upon like my space again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
What a jerk. That person. Anyway. Can we focus a little bit on like what you just said, what it was like to be a woman leader leading all different ages, races, backgrounds, religions, and then being that Asian American woman? What obstacles did you face that maybe your colleagues didn't?
Yeah, I mean, it was throughout my entire time, in starting with ROTC. So that's like a training program you do in college. And I feel like it's the first time I just got yelled at. That wasn't my dad. It was just like all these people really yelling about all sorts of things. You're not, running fast enough, or you're not shiny with your shoes enough, or whatever it was. And I was like, people yelling. That's not what I'm learning at school about effective leadership.
Right.
But I mention it because I think with all of these different careers that I've had, whether the military, or corporate, or schools, I've been able to try on different leadership styles. And so much of it, especially in the military, when you see a woman, and I was small, short, and didn't look like I was an athlete, you know, you're Asian, so really, can you lead? Can you really be an athlete? It's been about breaking stereotypes, right? Like I remember I had the head of the detachment, you know, come to me, and he was like, you know, there's a physical fitness test, and, you know, better make sure that you do well on it. And I was like, who are you talking to? Do you even know that, like, I was an athlete in school? And I remember he was like, well, anyone who gets like a perfect score on this physical fitness test, I'll take them out to dinner. And I wasn't thinking about that, but I was just like, well, you're just a jerk, because how could you talk to me and then, you know, think that you're so great because you, I guess, train every day or whatever else you do. But anyway, at that race, like I mean, I had trained because I guess I do respond well when given that kind of challenge, because I ended up training that winter break, and I lapped him when we did a race. I know. And then somehow I managed to get a perfect score. So I think I didn't even know that I did that. I just knew that I'd done well because I prepared. And I ended up showing up. He's like, I can't believe you got a perfect score. Did you really? I mean, that's what he said next. He was like, did you really get a perfect score?
Oh my gosh.
Like, you can't self-report your scores. Like you have a person there. You have a team of people who are validating how long you do your, you know, arm hang or your like push-up, whatever else you do. And we ended up I took my family to a dinner, like a steakhouse. I remember I was like, order whatever you want. Order 2 steaks, order dessert. And for us, that was like such a big deal to do that. And I was like, because this guy's going to pay for it. And I show up with this like big bill. And I'm like, here you go. But yeah, you know, I think, Brianna, it is about that. And that's happened throughout my career, especially in the military. People thinking that I can't do really much, I guess, because I'm Asian and I'm small, but actually that I can, and we can. So we're not stereotypes. We can break those. And it first starts with believing in ourselves and then taking action instead of just getting so angry about it, right? Like, how can I actually take action on this? And yes, prove them wrong, but also just prove to ourselves that we can do whatever we want to.
How did you kind of fight or make space for yourself to be respected? Especially if you were trying on like leadership styles and some like the shouting, especially like now, like ruling by fear or making people feel like belittled or inferior has definitely fallen out of favor, and rightfully so. So as you're trying on all these leadership styles, what did you find that worked for you, and how did you end up commanding the respect that you deserved just because, you know what I mean? Like, you should have had it anyway, but how did you use all these tools to, I guess, get the quote unquote rightful seat at the table?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I did try some of these styles that did not work for me. So for example, we went to military boot camp and people are dropping F-bombs. I mean, it's just like a cursing war. I guess that's what we communicate. Give me the effing butter. Like, it was just, everything was really, cursing everywhere. And so I tried that too. I was like, go ahead, let's go and, you know, do effing like push-ups or whatever I was trying to say. But like, that just didn't work for me. And there was like a certain way you sing songs in the military. And I was like, oh, so that doesn't work for me. These songs don't work. And so I made it my own. So for example, I was the head physical fitness person. And instead of doing the hurrahs and the, you know, whatever the different songs were that were kind of sexist, I would say, like, let's take it. And by then we were getting so tired of this training that, you know, the song that says, we're not going to take it.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna take it. And I said, repeat after me. And I said, we're not gonna take it. And then they were like, so it was just awesome because you could take, you know, similar culture, but then bring in your own. And so we had all of these different cheers that we came up with songs, which were kind of a protest against this oppressive military training that allowed us to communicate and yell this out. in a camaraderie way where people really couldn't say anything about it. So that was great. And I mean, it ended up where I like thought I was going to fail at this camp, but I ended up, I mean, again, like because I built relationships through cheering people on, like Brianna, you were struggling with a push-up. I'd be the first person yelling at you. I'm like, you can do it, you know? And that's great when you can be there for people and then other people can be there for you. So I ended up winning their top physical award and their like top, basically their valedictorian version in the military boot camp.
Awesome.
So it came from like people thinking I was going to fail to, you know, ending up doing really well. And I think that had a lot to do with trying on leadership styles, but finding the one that most worked with me.
I think that's important too. I think you kind of have to try all the different styles, and a lot of it, some of it's just like learned. Like I remember when I first started managing people, and this is in like hospitality, you just kind of like bark things and it's not personal. It's just like everything is stressful and there's time management. We have to get done. You have to get done. You have to execute. Someone's waiting. Someone's upset. Blah, 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 blah. And I remember somebody eventually coming to like one of my bosses and being like, she's always yelling at me. And then I was like, I'm not yelling at you. I yell at everybody. Like, it's not personal. It's just like, we're on, you know, we have a standard we have to meet. And as soon as like I realized sometimes my tone, I've always had a very edgy tone. And then like I started prefacing with that with like new people we would hire. I was like, hey, if I ever bark at you, it's not personal. It's just because I'm like, I've got 3 seconds to get 12 things out. But you have to like learn to refine it, you know, over time. And that's like, I think it just takes that, you know, it's an opportunity, right, for self-growth and exploration. But it's also an opportunity for self-reflection and like understanding that, hey, like you don't have to do things just because that's the way they were done to you, or that's the way you were shown a certain way to lead or to execute, you know? So I love that you're like, it didn't all work for me, but I found what did work, you know? Like, I think that's super important.
I mean, I want to draw that point even further, Brianna, because I think a lot of it has to do with conscious leadership, right? Both in work and in life. Have you developed enough self-awareness to know how you're showing up and how you're affecting people? And if you're being, you know, truly bitchy, or you're just leading in a very direct way.
Yeah.
And how do you want to show up? Because maybe you do want to show up with, I mean business. And if that means that you're going to take my directness as a being a bitch, then I own that. And I'm cool with that. But if I actually want you to feel held and with a ton of compassion, then I don't want you to see me that my toughness that way. Like I want to be tough, but in a way that aligns with my values about compassion. And you can do both. And so neither of them are better. It's just, can we really see ourselves and decide and then consciously choose? Because so much of us, like what we are trained to do from, you know, our own parents, our grandparents, our family, teachers, and then our bosses, like we think that's the way, when in reality, there's so many different ways. And can we pull out of this societal expectation of what's a good girl, right? What's a good leader, and just be ourselves and at choice. But it takes a ton of just looking in the mirror and being like, shoot, man, that's actually different than how I want to show up. Let me pivot now. Let me own that.
Absolutely. And I think the only way, I said to my son probably this morning, he spilled chocolate chip pancakes and syrup all over the chair, right? And I'm like, Declan, you got to focus on what you're doing, buddy. And then he just, and I'm like, it's okay to make a mistake, you know, but that doesn't mean you can't, you can make a mess every day and it's okay. And you're going to ruin the chairs. In fact, they already are ruined. But that's neither here nor there. I say that for 2 reasons. One, it's okay to mess up, right? As long as you don't continue to make the same mistake. And 2, having the awareness to say, hey, this is a faux pas, but I'm going to hold you to the standard. So if you keep breaking the standard, then you're reprimanded, or then this. And I think that helped me as a leader, which was like, hey, there's a standard to be managed. And having those boundaries, I think, are firm. You can be a wench. You can be a bulldog. You can be a bitch if you need to be. Great. Get the job done. But also, like you're saying, there's a time and place. Does your team trust you? Do they respect you? Can they come to you? And I look at that like in life too. Like, are your friends coming to you? Does your kid feel safe in your space? Like, and are you setting like a boundary? So it kind of goes back to like that comment that guy made to you, like, oh, are you actually in the Air Force? And having that firm boundary, you learned, I'll try to put myself in your shoes. I don't understand that experience at all, but I would never let someone say that to me now, you know what I mean? But I learned, and I grew that boundary. I had the awareness. I don't care if he thinks I'm a good girl. I've changed the standard now because you've already insulted me once, and I'm not going to stand for it. Like that. I think that evolution is like, it's like natural. And when you're in those situations, does that make sense? Like,
totally. I mean,
sometimes I say things backwards. Sometimes I say things backwards. So I'm like,
let's like normalize mistakes.
Yeah.
Mistakes are okay. In fact, they're a way to learn, and learning is good, which means we're going to make mistakes. Great. So I want to highlight that. Second is that when we grow to be more self-aware, can we also set boundaries? Because that is not easy. In fact, I find when we're trying to create psychological safety. So for example, I really want to be there for you, Brianna. I want to make sure that you feel cared for, that you feel heard. And then you come to me, and I've had people do this as my team, and they'll say like, I'm super unhappy because I can't afford a home. And of course that's terrible, because I want them to be able to afford a home. New York City is very expensive. And at the same time, they're like angry because I'm not able to provide salaries for all teachers that are high enough for them to afford homes. And there's a lot of racism and injustice, and all of that is real.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's just a lot of anger that's being shared. And I'm just like taking it and trying to be empathetic. But at what point do you say, that's terrible? Also, I am doing what I can, and if there's any other suggestions that I can do, please let me know, but we're going to draw a boundary. And so I just think as a leader, how do we allow people to share, have a safe space, make mistakes, and then you said another thing, which is like also hold people accountable, that actually there's a boundary and you're not going to cross it. I'm going to hold you accountable that that's not what we're going to do here, because that's hurting the culture. If we end up just saying all the things that make our heart heavy, which is all valid, and that we're going to get therapy for that, but for work, the way that we're going to work, it's going to be professional. So all of those things have so much impact on how we lead at work and in life. And if we're not mindful about it, for myself, I ended up having these conversations where I'm like, I'm pretty sure that crossed the boundary of like, I'm really empathetic, but I'm like, that's disrespectful now. But I wasn't able to hold it because I wasn't even sure like what happened. I wasn't clear enough. So that's such a good point that you made.
Yeah, I'm just following up on what you say. So you're making some good points. Let's talk a little bit about this transition into motherhood. Once you became a mom, how did this influence how you were in business?
So at the time when I became a mom, I was waking up at 5, leaving the house at 6, getting to school by 7, and then staying at school till 7 or 8, and then getting home, having a really quick dinner, and then getting back and working. That's like school startup world. I signed up for that. I was really proud of the work we were doing. But obviously with a baby on the way, that's not even possible. So it was hard because I didn't have anyone at the organization who actually talked to me. I was like one of the first to have a baby who was in a school role. And I ended up deciding my husband got an offer to go to India for 6 months, and I decided to go with him. Wow. So it was a good break. And I came back at a different organization and leading a network of schools. But I want to mention this because I really wish that I had an opportunity to talk with people at my first organization about what it would mean to be a mother and how I could make the job work so I could continue to be really dedicated, but also be a mom. And so I use that because whenever we have people who lead or just are in organizations and want to be parents, I want to make the workplace work because we want people to be their whole selves. And it's that influenced how I try to build cultures to celebrate when someone says, I'm going to have a baby. And sometimes the organization will say, like, really? Are you really committed? Like, why now? I mean, it's just so sad.
Wow.
Because you're like, well, obviously you're not that committed then, because that's going to be more important than your job. And I'm like, well, shouldn't it be?
Right?
Right?
Wow.
Especially for educated children. So I think for me, having empathy for parents, having empathy for staff, trying to create the workplaces that I wish that we had having a kid, and also just setting boundaries. You mentioned that earlier, Brianna. Like, how do we set up boundaries? How do we set up boundaries with our kids even, so that we can take care of all the pieces of ourselves, including ourselves? So I really believe that, these are important, and I wouldn't have known had I not become a mom.
Yeah. And I think that's so good that you pointed out, like, you wish you would have had that conversation with the former organization before you like became a mom and like switched to a different organization to see what would their take have been with you assuming this mothering journey, as well as were there any other hurdles that like were parlayed into that, or once you had the child, like, and you were starting a new job, like, did you meet any other obstacles?
So many. I mean, as a mom and not seeing a lot of other moms in high power roles, who I thought were able to have whatever they called their all. So I don't believe in having it all, because that means, oh, well, I've got to be the top leader at my organization, and I've got to make all of the meals from scratch, like plant my own corn, like make all the muffins and run a marathon and look really skinny, and because I don't eat. I mean, it's just like all these things that are ridiculous. For me, because I didn't see that about what it meant to have both work and life and family, I ended up, for my own self, trying to create a community. And that's how I launched Boss Mamas, which I started a few years back, which was about how do we become bosses at all the aspects that matter to us: work, family, self-care, what strategies can we use? But really it starts with mindset. Like, do you believe that you are worthy of having your all? And start there. And then it goes to, what is your all anyway? Because if we're going to say all of those things, it's not practical. Like, if we're like, well, I can't have it all. I'm like, that's true, because you can't have all of that, but you can have your all if you can define it. So people are just like, okay, well, I believe in myself, but I don't even know what it is I want. I'm like, let's start there too. What do you want? What do we want? And it looks different for different people. And sometimes for me, in this stage of my life, my all looks like doing work that matters. So I coach, I facilitate, I have creative projects like that book and the podcast. And I really focus on my kiddos. Like, so if I were to say, like, what's the center, it's like family. And then I have time for these projects and getting to know people, amazing people like you. And I also take care of myself. So I have specific time blocks where I'm like, this is the time I can work, and the rest of it is focused on family or myself, but I'm not going to compromise. So no, I'm not working 24/7 on the business, and that's okay. In this chapter, that's okay. So that's how I've defined my all. And then all of these different strategies follow from that. So once we are worthy, we believe we are worth it, we're good enough, we deserve it, we know what we want. The rest is all tactical, right? Like, okay, so then how do I set it up so I can just make sure I, have these daily practices that support it?
I love that. And I like how you said, I block off time for work and then I do everything else. Like, this is my mental health time. Like, my husband, he makes fun of me because he'll pick a fight once in a while because I play a lot of tennis, and I'm like, well, do you want me to hit you with a racket, or do you want me to hit the ball with the racket? Because like, I get frustrated. I have aggression. Like, I need an outlet. We all need an outlet. That's what I think. And he used to play like semi-pro cricket. He's British. And he doesn't have that in the States, obviously. So So he struggles, but I said I never had an outlet because I was working, 100 hours a week on my feet all the time. And you have to give yourself that. And you've kind of touched on this, but I kind of want to delve a little bit into how motherhood like reshaped your leadership style and maybe made you even more strong and capable. I don't know about you personally, but I feel like when I had my son, I feel like my voice was like, it wasn't about just me anymore. Like I had to speak up, not just for myself, but for him. And I realized kind of like what you were touching on, like I'm modeling something. I'm modeling what's acceptable behavior. I'm modeling unacceptable behavior. I have to show him things. So I'm interested to know if your children impacted you and your leadership style once they came along.
For sure. Yeah. So a couple things happened. One is I got even more clear about what my priorities were, because you can't have it all. Well, you can have your all, but your all even needs to be tightened. So figure out what it is that you want, which is really only a few things, and the rest you let go. So I used to be a perfectionist. Luckily, it's been many, many years, but I learned to let go. And honestly, Brianna, it's so much easier to delegate because I'm like, all right, I'm going to hire hopefully the right people. I'm going to let go and trust my people. And when there are mistakes or failures or whatever happens, I am going to own it with them that was part of my decision-making process. So much of my leadership is we're going to do these things. We're not going to do those things. I trust you to own those things. And I want us to run in a place where mistakes are fine. And that gets a lot of flack, frankly, because there's a lot of organizations, including the ones that I've been part of, where we do everything and we do it with perfection and there's no tolerance for mistakes. And if the leader is not side by side with their people, then they must not be committed. And I'm like, well, actually, I disagree. And that's where I learned it from the military, frankly. You get responsibility for your people. Your boss is not checking on you, micromanaging and, saying like, okay, well, I want to know everything. I'm like, well, no, you trust me to do it. I will do it. And I will block and tackle and send up information, so but we're going to trust each other. So that skill I learned from the military. But honestly, when you lead that way, and that's honestly the kind of organization I'd want to be part of, not everybody wants that. So you have to have the right culture. I've had organizations where I'm like, oh, that's not going to work in this culture, and that's fine. So it's time to move on and do different things. But I do believe that creating the workplaces we want means leaning in and being uncomfortable and being, some people aren't going to be happy with it, but it is a major shift.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said though about, and this came up on another podcast. And so it's interesting. It's coming to be a theme, as you said, mindset and letting go. And I think those are two, I think we're getting into them more now. I think we're understanding, like you hear like the thing, mind over matter, blah, 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 mindset is everything, et cetera, et cetera. But it really is something that we can control, and letting go is something we can control. But I like how you also said I was a perfectionist, like I've recovered from that. And I'm a firm believer that if you make your way to the top of an organization, you are responsible for all these people. But like you said, if you're putting the right people in the right places, it should be pretty seamless. Not that it's going to be perfect, but the work should get done and it should get done well. And I like how you said, even if somebody makes a mistake, like you're there, you're not going to babysit your team, but you are going to be there with them if something happens, because that's what you put them in the role to do. So of course you're going to support them. Seems pretty simple to me.
Yeah, but I mean, this look, if you were to look at camps of leadership style, there's I want my manager, I want my boss to be in the trenches with me, doing the thing, right? I want to make sure they know how to do it, do it better than me, show me how to do it. We're in there beginning of the day, all the way till late hours doing it together. And so there's a lot of power to that. It's awesome, right? But then on the other side, it's like, look, I trust you. I hired you. I believe in you. You do your job. I do my job. You go home after you're done with your job. I go home after I'm done with my job. We work together in systems. So we rely on each other. It's collaborative, but I trust you. You trust me. So that's not in the trenches together. And you can see there's like positives and negatives to each style.
Yeah.
My style, the second style. And there's a lot of positives I see. I mean, that's more like the leadership that, we learn in these traditional institutions. It's a lot like the military. It doesn't mean that you're not connected. It just means you need to ask for help. You need to tell me when you want me to be there, but I'm not going to be at your back, right? Doing the same job you are. And so people either love it or don't love it, but I think it's an important thing to narrate because you want the right leader in the right job who fits the culture. So I want to name it because it's not for everybody, right? And the first style too is amazing, but also can be debilitating because you're going to that sets you up for burnout if you're doing all the jobs all together. And like, what's the leader actually doing? You're in the trenches with everybody. I'm like, are they moving it forward? I'm not really sure. Are the systems that clear where, someone, I mean, in the military, someone could die and it's got to keep going, right? Like you have to have systems that it doesn't matter what's going on, who's there, we can keep going. And I'm not sure the first system really works for that. So they're both positives, negatives to both, but you got to be aware. That's key, right?
Such is life, right? There's always positive and negatives. So what do you think, or what has been your experience about the most glaring issues that women face in leadership roles? And you could even take it one step further if you want to specify what it's like for women of color in a leadership role. Like, what are the biggest challenges that they face?
Okay, so let's start with women of color because it applies honestly so much to women. Like we're working all together, right? Whether you're a person of color, a woman of color, woman, if you're not of the white male cisgender, quote unquote standard, we got to work together, right? That's all of us working together. So I'm going to go with women of color, and there are real systemic issues that prevent women of color from shattering the glass ceiling. But for women of color, it's the concrete ceiling because I don't see women of color at the top. So how do you see what's possible for me? And I don't envision it because I don't see it's possible. And there are real issues that make it so the playing field isn't fair. So I want to name that there are a ton of systemic discrimination and microaggressions and bias that exists. But I'm going to answer your question from like, okay, so what does that mean for us? Because I can't just sit here naming all the unfairness in the world and doomsday, like it's all terrible and like, that's unfortunate, but real. So I want to start with what can we do? And so for women of color, a real barrier we face is that we have these stereotypes put on us and it defines us a certain way. You started the whole conversation, Brianna, with like, what does a good girl do? How do we introduce ourselves? How do we be modest? How do we be grateful? And how do we be good? And so when we follow all those things, we end up with quiet, like, thank you for giving me more jobs that don't really get me promoted. Thank you for, not paying me what I'm worth. It's just like, it's like we end up with these mindsets that leave us not really going after what we deserve and what we can, really have an impact at work with. And so I would say number one is know that we're worthy. We're awesome. We can do whatever it is we want to do. You're an author, a podcaster. Like you had to have this belief in yourself to go after it. And even though there's lots of things out there saying like, oh, what if you fail? Are you gonna do it perfectly? Do you know what you're doing? Like, is it gonna work? And it's just like, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Yeah, I'm gonna do it anyway. It really is like, so much of it is like belief in yourself. Like, and if you're feeling like, I don't know, I'm unsure, I'm weak, I'm imperfect, know that is normal. Everyone's imperfect. Everyone doesn't know everything. And the system is designed to help us feel that way. It's like,
that's a good point.
Yeah, who do you think you are? Like, really? Come on. And if you're a white guy, I mean, Devlin, I'm not sure if he's white, like, but white boys get different message. It's like, you go be whoever you want to be. You're, be your bold self. You're already amazing. And I'm like, really? How come they get that? And we don't get our, fill of feeling good. So start with by design. If we're feeling insecure or weak, it's by design. So we need to bust through that and believe in ourselves. So number one, believe in yourself. Number two, we often, because we're trying to be good, we want to be liked, right? Because that helps us in life. And it also keeps us from actually even knowing what we want. So people please, we perfect, we try to be good. And then when we ask the question, like, what is it that we actually want in life? Analiza, do you really want to be a doctor? You know?
Yeah.
Like, actually, no, I want to be something else. And that means I've got to define for myself, not media, not all these Instagram and social media, but define what I want to do. And when I define what I want to do, I should think about what I love to do. Like, what makes my heart sing? Is it writing like you, talking with people? Is it being funny, playing tennis, you know, like you? Like, let's identify that, you know, and let's find places where we can shine. Because often we're like, okay, I have to fit myself into this cookie cutter thing, be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. And I'm like, actually, I don't like that. So two is be you and find what, like, type of role, career, what you want. So that's what I would say is number two. And number three is when you are able to be in a place where you feel like your work matters, you also need to get what you deserve. So that means you negotiate, you tell people your accomplishments, you look for the promotion, you go for the top seat, you keep climbing. And it's so weird because it's like, well, that's not what good girls do. That sounds like you're trying to, who do you think you are? Why are you talking about yourself? And why are you negotiating and asking for more? You should be grateful. And I'm like, I get all those messages. Those are not true. So counter all of that messaging. It's not you. It's how the system was designed. So be uncomfortable and go for it. Take courage over comfort. So know those three things. If you can do those three things, you can really rise in leadership. And when you rise, you can design that workplace that would really bring the best of not just you, but everyone around you. And so that's what I love about this work. It's like, hey, do you get that it's a matrix and you can actually get out of it?
I love that.
It's really scary, but you can do it.
Oh, no, that's awesome. And I want to ask you this, because you were kind of like a pioneer, right? There's not many Asian American women or women of color in these leadership roles. And in fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was reading an article about Latinos, particularly Mexicans, and how there's, we have such a huge population in America, but none of them, like, especially women, are in these leadership roles. Like, and you're like, well, why is that? And it comes back to representation and all the things and systemically that you're, alluding to. So what does that mean for you as an Asian American woman to have risen to that level? Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it feels weird. That's why I'm like, oh, it feels weird. But I'm like, but that's the point. It should feel weird because it was by design made so that I would feel weird about it. And I would be maybe even hesitant to go for it. So for me, I'm really proud. You asked me earlier how my work is influenced by my kids. Absolutely. I mean, the reason I'm even doing this podcast and writing these books and taking those roles is because I want my kids to see that mommy did things that were scary and were not based on the stereotypes of Asian American women, just people of color. And she did it anyway. And she made mistakes and she's okay. And I can do it too, right? Like, I can do scary things and I want to have an impact on people around me. And that means I'm going to do scary things. So for me, I take so much courage knowing that my kids are watching both the things I'm proud of and things I'm not so proud of, but that I'm stepping up, right? Like I'm stepping up to choose to put myself in discomfort because I want to be courageous and I want them to be courageous too.
Oh, I love that. And it's like, you don't know else is going to watch you and see that. And another little girl could be like, she looks like me, or know that you're Filipino American. And that just is like, oh, she's Filipino too. Like, you just never know who you're inspiring. So I think that's incredible, even like
Absolutely.
Other women who might be, of any age or like race, you just never know who's looking up to you because just to have the aspiration or the desire to do something, and you've done it. So kudos to you for being uncomfortable and courageous. I love that.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mama Knows Not a podcast. That was our first interview with Analiza Wolf about her road to leadership and how motherhood has impacted